Well, on March 13th of this year, something interesting happened in Rome. Anyone know what that was? The Catholic Church chose a Jesuit to be the new Pope. And this Pope, who chose the somewhat unusual name Francis, well, he's been in the news quite a bit lately, in case you haven't noticed. Anyone notice? He's been in the news a lot lately. This is a guy, first off, he starts out with actions. His actions started off speaking maybe even louder than his words did. First off, he decided that he didn't want to live in the lavish apostolic palace. And I mean, a palace, it truly is. That's where the Pope normally lives. Instead, he opted to live in the more modest papal suite that's at the Vatican Hotel. He'd rather sit in a chair rather than a throne. He dresses like a simple priest. Now you notice, he gets the white cassock. I understand the Pope's the only one that gets to wear one of those. But do you notice the distinct absence of bling? There's no ermine, there's no gold, no red Prada shoes. He wears, just ordinary black shoes. He's got a rather plain-looking cross around his neck. He goes out and he washes the feet of inmates in a detention center. And I understand that he's driving his security detail crazy because he likes to go out and mix with the crowds and things like that. Yeah, but they're learning, and they'll keep him safe. They're professionals. But then we have his words. He hasn't been Pope for a year yet, and he's already making statements that are causing people around the world, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, to sit up and take notice. He talks about unbelievers and atheists. Here's what he had to say in a letter to a newspaper editor. He says, "The issue for those who do not believe in God is to obey their conscience. Sin, even for those who have no faith, exists when people disobey their conscience." Ponder that for a moment. Or how about this one? This has been getting even more play. He talks about the major issues that we need to be confronting. He says we cannot insist only on issues related to abortion, gay marriage, and the use of contraceptive methods. This is not possible. And finally, this one. He says, if someone is gay and looking for the Lord, who am I to judge him? Who am I to judge, he says. I don't know if he can bring about any major institutional change. I have no idea how that works. But I sure hope he keeps rocking the boat. I sure hope he keeps doing that. He says, who am I to judge? I spent 8 years in Catholic grade school. Every classroom had a picture of the Pope up on the wall. And for most of that time it was Pope Paul VI was up on the wall. We were taught that the Pope, if Jesus was seated at the right hand of God, then the Pope was literally the left hand of God. I mean, who am I to judge? You're the Pope. You get to judge. That's what we were taught. And yet Francis comes along and he says, who am I to judge? And people are calling that refreshing, new, progressive. And Pope Francis would be the first one to disagree with that. He'd say that he's simply doing what he vowed to do as a priest when he was ordained, which is to follow the example of Jesus. Both Matthew and Luke quote Jesus as saying something that I've always liked. I love this passage. He says, and why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? After that, in another place, he says this, very simply. He says, stop judging others, and you will not be judged. Stop criticizing others, or it will all come back on you. It'll all come back to haunt you. So when the Pope says, "Who am I to judge?" there's nothing really new here. He's just trying to get us back in touch with what Jesus said. And there are voices in opposition to what he is saying. Imagine that. Voices in opposition to what he's saying. Because in case you hadn't noticed, for a lot of folks out there who proclaim their Christianity, they have a funny way of ignoring the stuff that Jesus said that doesn't fit with their personal ideology. They rationalize it away, or they just pretend it doesn't exist. And they turn Jesus into something that is totally fitting in with their own ideology. Some of the things that we've been hearing from some of the loudest voices of those who claim to be our religious leaders come to us in the form of condemnation, judgment, criticism. Try watching a TV preacher or two on those cable channels that are in the nether regions there. Try watching a little bit of that. Tell me if you notice any condemnation, judgment, or criticism. And hey, let's not stop there. What about the people? What about the people who make a living commenting on our political issues, or maybe even, dare I say it, our politicians themselves? Ever hear any condemnation or judgment or criticism from those folks? Not much, maybe 100% of the time. But, we might conclude from all of this that they've either been intentionally ignoring these teachings, or they've conveniently forgotten them. But who am I to judge? Hey, if Jesus and now the Pope are saying to stop judging and criticizing, what exactly does that mean for the rest of us? You know, it's okay to engage in constructive criticism. And what I mean by that is to discuss calmly and rationally the cause and effect consequences of an idea or a course of action. I'd like to see more of that. It's called debate. And in a well-moderated debate among reasonable people, you lose points if you make personal attacks on an opponent. You lose points when you do things like comparing them to Nazis, or comparing them to people who appease Nazis. Or, if you agree with me, well, by golly, you're Hitler. But of course I exaggerate, because we don't hear anything like that coming out of the mouths of our political leaders, do we? Of course not. But who am I to judge? Great leaders lead by example. And I think that Pope Francis is showing us that. I'm impressed. I'm listening. Lots of other people are listening. And that's a good thing. He's off to a great start, don't you think? And he's doing what a great Christian leader should do. Follow the example of the person that you claim to follow. This guy Jesus, he had a deep understanding of the human condition. He knew how difficult it was for people to stop complaining about other people, to stop engaging in fault-finding and trying to fix people. He knew how difficult it was for people to stop marginalizing those they couldn't fix, or those that they couldn't force to change their views. He knew about this tendency that we have to distance ourselves or to separate from the people that we judge as being faulty or in need of fixing or in need of changing. He knew all that. And he knew something even more important. He knew that this cycle of fault-finding, trying to fix, and separating was causing some major damage to our relationships. And in so doing, was also causing some major damage to our ability to create a peaceful and sustainable future for humankind. 2,000 and some odd years later, we're still working on it. But we're learning. I like to think we're learning, getting some good reminders. Jesus was, shall we say, a lot more evolved than the rest of the folks at his time. He says things like this, and it takes the rest of us a while to catch up. 2,000 years, and we're beginning to just start to get a clue, which is great. You know, in Unity, we talk all the time about how human consciousness is evolving. There are new forms of intelligence that are emerging from our evolution. We start to use terms like emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and those are things that we weren't even thinking about 50 years ago. So it's happening. And one of the most beneficial things that this evolutionary process has taught us, this evolutionary process has brought us to the point where it seems like just now we're starting to be able to take multiple perspectives. We're starting to be able to get beyond that log in our own eye, to focus on that, and then to be able to take the perspective of another person. We're better able, at this point in our evolution, to see and appreciate the experiences and worldviews of other people and other cultures. That's a big deal. It's a major change for the better. And that's what Jesus was talking about when he suggested that we stop being so obsessed with pointing out the errors and faults of others, and instead maybe, I don't know, take a look at our own stuff. There's a quote that I like from Unity author Eric Butterworth. He says this, very simply. He says, "We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are." That log in our eye gets projected and reflected out there onto everything we see. So if we're looking out there, we better start looking at our own stuff first. Our worldview, our own worldview, shapes our experience. So if we want to live consciously and intentionally, we need to examine our view. That's the reason why we emphasize reflection and self-awareness here. Not selfish awareness, but self-awareness, being honest with ourselves about our worldview and how it affects the way that we interpret reality. Do we think that this is a friendly or a hostile universe? Is the world for us or against us? Is this a world of scarcity or abundance? Do we think that being different is dangerous? Now, I don't want a show of hands here, but think about how you reacted when I started out this talk by mentioning the Pope. Anyone have any allergies to talk about the Pope or the Catholic Church? That's how it works, folks. It's in the background. We don't even realize it. We don't see that we're entering into this mode of negative fault finding. How about this photo on the screen? Reactions? All the tattoos. Some people are thinking, nice ink. Others might be thinking other things. Just be aware. What worldview is being projected here? What kind of reaction? What do you think her occupation is? What does it bring up? Whatever it happens to be. Anyone bothered by the house? Could be. Very much so. Okay, so there's that picture. Now this one. Same person. Same person. She's a Lutheran pastor in Denver. Would we be willing to go to her church, listen to one of her talks?
Yeah.
Good. Good. Not everyone would. There are those who walk among us every day who have problems with that. How many people get marginalized and separated from us and put in the distance because they're different, because we're put off by an appearance or something that's none of our business? Oh, but you don't understand. I just don't like all those tattoos. There must be something wrong with somebody who has to do that to their body and blah, 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 blah. The rationalizing goes on. We bolster up our ideology and we create that ongoing cycle. There it is. We can get real good at rationalizing our negative and judgmental worldviews. 2 years ago, during our fall series, we were working with a book called Birthing a Greater Reality, which talks about our conscious evolution, getting beyond that cycle of rationalizing and negative fault finding and things like that. And the author uses this great little story, very simple story. It's a Hindu story of 6 people wearing blindfolds who encounter an elephant. This cartoon I got up here. They encounter an elephant, all right? And each one of them's on a different part of the elephant, and one of them grabs the tusk and says, oh, it's a spear. The one grabs the tail and says grabs the tail, says it's a rope. And so on and so forth. And of course the judgmental elephant up there is saying you're all a bunch of idiots. Everybody's got a totally different picture of what it is that they're dealing with here. And the part that they leave out of the story is what happens after this scene here. Because what happens after this scene is they all get together again. They all get together to discuss what they think an elephant is, okay? And operating at that former negative level of consciousness, they get into a big argument. They get into a big fight because each one of them only has a part of the picture, and each one thinks that their part of the picture is the whole of reality and the other versions are wrong or perhaps even dangerous. Nope, 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 you're wrong. In fact, there must be something wrong with you because you don't see things the way that I do, so I either have to get you to change what you think or I'll just ignore you if I can't make you change because you're wrong. Either that or I'll call you Hitler. You know, that's how it works. And then we shift to the next level. Operating at the next level of consciousness, what happens here is they find a way to take all of the perspectives into account. They compare what they have, and out of that process, a little rational debate, emerges this greater and more accurate picture of reality, because none of them had an accurate picture, and when they get together and put it all together, out of that comes the elephant, the greater picture of reality that emerges. Nobody's wrong. Everybody has a piece of the truth, but operating at that old judgmental and confrontational level of consciousness, that greater reality would have been lost. Wouldn't have happened. Makes me wonder what humankind has lost over the centuries because we couldn't rise above that old way of thinking. Makes me wonder what price we might have to pay in the future if we can't learn how to do that now. So, Jesus and the Pope aren't just muttering a bunch of feel-good platitudes here. They're telling us something that has important ramifications for our future. Diverse ideas, opposing worldviews are essential to the process of evolution. The reason that there's something instead of nothing, the reason that there's a universe instead of oblivion, is because diversity and polarity coexist. Negative, positive. Hot, cold, light, dark, Republican, Democrat. A great example of evolutionary polarity and diversity at work in leadership can be found in the example of Abraham Lincoln. He learned how to appreciate and welcome, not just appreciate, but to welcome multiple and conflicting perspectives. You know, that movie Lincoln from last year was based on a book called Team of Rivals, which tells us how Lincoln chose to deliberately surround himself with people who disagreed with him and held worldviews that conflicted with his own. In fact, he had such a contentious bunch in his cabinet that during meetings they'd sit around and call each other liars, thieves, traitors, things like that. I mean, they had some major, major differences. He could have surrounded himself with a bunch of yes men, couldn't he? He had the power to do that, but he didn't. And the author says this about Lincoln. She says, Dolores Kearns Goodwin, she says, Lincoln's political genius was rooted in his remarkable array of emotional strengths, which enabled him to form friendships with rivals who had previously disdained him, to put past grudges aside, to assume responsibility for the failure of subordinates, to share credit with ease, and to learn from mistakes. There's a leading edge development in human consciousness. That's the level of consciousness that it took to put an end to slavery and to preserve this country in the face of probably the greatest threat that it's ever faced. That's what can be accomplished when we learn to stop worrying about the speck in our neighbor's eye and instead start focusing on expanding our own vision and inviting those with different ideas into our circle of caring and compassion. Like I said before, I think this Pope guy's onto something. See you next week.